Hello, welcome to EMD Media's weekly show, the H panel. The H panel today will talk about the African Union monitoring, verification, and compliance mission on Ethiopia-Tigray peace process. The reason for raising this topic today is the mission was briefing stakeholders in Mabala this week, and we'll be talking about monitoring the monitors, what the panelists think about the briefing and everything related to that in terms of the Pretoria Agreement, Nairobi 1 and Nairobi 2, what has happened, what has been accomplished, and what is missing, etc. But as usual, we'll start with the highlights of the week. I'm pleased to be joined today by Faisal Robla, our regular panelist, and Solomon Mazgabo, who also appeared a number of times here on the H panel, but also in our Tigrinya show of the UMD Media. UMD Media is live now online, but also broadcasted to the Horn of Africa under HBS on broadcasting services on satellite. Gentlemen, welcome to the weekly show.
Thank you for having us again.
Thank you very much.
Great. We'll start with the highlights of the week. Faisal, what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Yeah, I think what stood up for me was the study release, or rather the survey released by the Nationality Institute, I think, or peace, one of those institutes, and basically, Policy Institute, and basically, as you said when we were talking in the background, that this was completed in October 2022. They're releasing it now. It's a survey. It's a survey of a limited number of population, 1,100 people out of the 120 million Ethiopians. They touched and hit several nationalities, personage from some nationalities. They picked the Somali, the Oromo, the Afar, Sidama, what have you. Tigray was not covered in this. I think this is a huge study that basically comes on the conclusion of changing or potentially steering the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, steering towards a direction to change three main areas in the Constitution: the preamble, Article 8, and Article 39. And basically, according to the report, what came out of that study or survey are two camps. One camp is led by the Oromo and Somali sentiment. Tigray is missing. The other camp is led by the Amhara and smaller nationalities that some of us will be for the first time hearing. Basically, like Ari, Bena, Baskoti, Bench, Benishangul, Chara, some of them, less than 1 million. So for the Somalis and the Oromo, they basically come on this issue that they never be changed. That's it. That's the conclusion. We don't want these three articles to be touched because it reflects the history and the outcome of a long, protracted struggle that we have been doing. The Amhara respondents and the smaller groups that they lead come to the conclusion that we want these areas to be changed. The numbers go back and forth, but that's the overall sentiment. And I think that's very telling. I don't know how much manipulation took place in terms of the smaller groups and who was representing, but you have to understand that they were calling or surveying most of Amharic speakers, most likely people who work for the government, and people who are cadres. This is my own understanding. So several things stood out for me, and I will conclude on this issue here. I think Abiy wanted this study to come out, this thing, probably to quell pressure coming from the Amhara, to just give them some red meat to say that we probably are on the course to change. But here is the interesting thing for me, to me. The fact that Oromo and Somali, two on the southern wing and east of Ethiopia, said this should not be touched. Tigray is missing from the study also. Addis Ababa is another issue that, people are divided. As soon as the report came out, the Ogaden National Liberation Front came to public, and their press secretary said, if these changes are made to those three areas, we will unilaterally declare secession and a republic. That's exactly their word. We'll declare a republic. And the Amhara agreement will remain null and void. So from there on, you can see that whatever the intent of the prime minister and his team were for this study, or whoever did the study, it's handing to Prime Minister Abiy another crisis in the east, that's probably Oromia. This may have effect on the talks that started between Ola and the Ethiopian government. And I don't even know at this point in time where Tigray will fit in this scheme of this study. But as I said somewhere else, if somebody picks up fire on their own hands and burn themselves, this is exactly a scenario for Abiy. At a very critical time, if he picks this study's results and tries to meddle with the constitution, he will open up another Pandora box to himself and may burn himself in a way that we haven't seen so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. And I think the viewers would be interested to know the timing. The October 2022 means a month or a few weeks, I must say, before Pretoria Agreement. So the study was completed then, but the government chose to release it now. So timing, as always, has been interesting in this case. Saul, what stood out for you? What were the highlights for you? I mean, you were not here with us last week, but what are the big ticket items for you?
I think this is one of the biggest items, and I concur with Faisal's assessment of the situation and how Abiy is playing this card, but he may be overplaying it. One of the challenges with Abiy is he has too many cards in his hand. But like I think one of previous keeps Faisal made, he uses this like toys in a playground and keeps changing between these toys. But then one of those toys, one or more of those toys, may lit fire. I think that's what you see here. And we will continue to see the challenges from how he's trying to employ selectively from this. The other highlights are with Integrai. Particularly, I think this has been discussed the week before about the National Election Board's decision to deny TPLF its current standing, and as a result, the impact it has with Tigray politics. That's one important thing that continues to grab many in the Tigray community. But the verification and monitoring unit of the AU and the delegates from European community and others, international community, briefing on where things stand. You would expect them to walk a very fine line, but there are major areas also they avoided to discuss, which are under their mandate, particularly Western Tigray. They went as far as the David, but then the David is not the Western Front, the most Western Front of Tigray. The substantive, the third portion of Tigray, more than the third portion of Tigray, and more than 75% of Western Tigray is west of the David. So I think that's an issue which I think will continue to very delicate, of course, but they have to engage. Delicate, yes, but they have to engage. They have a responsibility to monitor, to verify, and make sure the deal or the Pretoria Agreement and the Nairobi 1 and 2 memorandums are standing. Of the general spirit of the peace holding seems to be true, because partly there are so many parties into this. So that's the one thing that's the elephant in the room. So everybody knows there are so many parties to this conflict. There are so many forces in Tigray. Those are the ENDA forces from Addis, the Amhara forces, and there are multiple of them, the Eritrea forces, and TDF, the Tigray forces. The focus has been primarily on TDF and secondarily on ENDF. The monitoring and verification doesn't want to say much about Eritrean forces, doesn't want to say much about multitude of Amhara forces. So that's still a big issue and a disappointment. They are trying to evade, but it will continue to be a source of major problem.
Okay, thank you, Sol. You have, I think, get us started with the main topic of the day. If you care to, I mean, if you will, if you want to comment, John Jackson is talking about the newly established Amhara Armed Resistance, the Amhara Popular Front. We can pick that up later. Today, we will be talking about the African Union monitoring, verification and compliance mission. And as I mentioned, as Solomon also mentioned, there was a briefing in Mekelle, and President of the interim regional administration of Tigray also spoke on that occasion. Let me just play a clip from that briefing, and we'll tackle that topic.
With an urgent and unhindered humanitarian access. Article 4 is protection of civilians, and Article 3 is the permanent cessation of hostile activities. Now, this one is further reinforced by the senior commander's declaration that was declared in Nairobi, that is Nairobi 1. And in the senior commander's declaration, we have of heavy weapons. That was on 10th of January in Agulai. Then thereafter, we had in February the withdrawal of Air Force systems that we also witnessed at the Mekelle Air Base. Children go back to school, we do not get those accidents. And also, when the farmers resume farming, they do not get those.
I'm going to make a bold statement and say that doing a TEDx talk is going to be the most transformative.
Okay, Faisal, what's your take? You had a chance to watch that, and there was also a briefing given by Chadabele, who is the ambassador of Ethiopia to Kenya, on a Twitter space, where he, unlike what is on the ground, said the non-ENDF forces have completely left Tigray. Faisal.
Yeah, I will start with Bacha Dabala's uninformed commentary that he gave to a group of people. Uninformed in the sense that a few days after that, we had the official, conversation around this issue, and I will come back to that. But uninformed, probably because he is known to really just say things off the cuff in order to please the crowd. So I understand he was talking to a, larger pro-government crowd to give the government of Ethiopia like it has taken care of business, and he denied if there are any Eritrean troops still around, or even for that matter, Amhara militia in the greater Tigray region. And few days after that has been busted as being a false statement, because both the International Monitoring Group as well as Getachew Reda, who is the interim president, confirmed and affirmed that Eritrean troops not only are they there, but they are harassing not only the public and Tigrayans, but also from what we read in between the lines from Getacheo's speech, the monitoring forces, that actually Getachew came in public to say, I don't envy what you are doing in terms of your job. You're going through so much hassle to just keep the mandate given to you, which is to ensure and secure Article 4 and 5 and Article 3. And here's the humanitarian delivery, protection of civilians, and making sure that every activity. He cannot do that at this point in time in all Tigray, around Shire and other areas, not to mention the fact that Western Tigray is completely a different ball game, where still Amhara troops have not vacated. So with Baja Dabala's, casual and often faulty information that he gives as one of the most important ambassadors Ethiopia has at this particular time, meaning i.e. Kenya, and most of the peace monitoring leadership are drawn from Kenya. So it was a disaster, not even to Ambassador Baja Dabale, but to the Ethiopian ruling elite, in the sense that here is a high-profile officer just not knowing what to say and lying a few days after has been, being, untrue. Having said that, I think Paul is question as to the Amhara forces now gathering a storm in northern Ethiopia and what has, I don't know if they can topple the prime minister's regime at this point in time, but the very fact that the Amhara nationalists have taken arms at a time when the Ethiopian government is weak, when the government is bleeding at many fronts, they are forces to be reckoned with. Their presence in the diaspora, their purse power, their domination over the mass media and Ethiopia's civil service, the fact that they live in Addis Ababa in a greater number of people, they are forced to be reckoned with. The question is, what does Abiy has in store for them? Would he do the same thing that he did to Tigray? Would he come to the table and compromise with them? And at what cost? Because as we saw with my previous presentation regarding the survey and the study of the Policy Institute, is he going to give them red meat so that they can be silent and come to the table? But for the first time since 2018, this is the time I see that the Amhara forces finally gave up on Abiy in a way that we haven't seen before. So that's something. I think with the monitoring, maybe I will come back to that issue in the next segment, but it's not a childish game. It's not a fool's errand in the sense that this is a humongous project that maintains several elements. DDR is part of it, monitoring and verification is another, securing and doing something about Western Tigray. So transitional justice is mentioned in the peace deal of Pretoria, which also interfaces with the DDR and the verification and the monitoring of the peace deal. All those require two important infrastructures. I think they need heavy capital. If this project is supposed to be successful, a huge capital infusion to this is necessary. The second thing that this thing needs to address is elephant in the house, Eritrea. Up to this point, the Ethiopian government has been silent about Eritrea, or often weighs things on its behalf on the side of what fits Eritrea. As we learned last week from the monitoring leadership, Eritrea is a huge hindrance to the verification and monitoring and implementation of the program. And if Eritrea continues this, what would be Ethiopia's government's next phase? And we have to see what that happens, what that is.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Solomon, on the issue of Baja, some say that it's not maybe he's not misinformed or ill-informed. It could be a purpose of neutralizing at least one force or over the other and so on. So first off, what is your take on Baja's description of what is the situation in terms of external forces? The second one is on the the general, the Kenyan, I think he's Kenyan general, he was specific on the positive developments, even daring to say 85%, 95% accomplished, impressive, all that and so on. So maybe a kind of account on how you look at that.
Thank you. On Bacha, I wouldn't add much on the facts Faisal Faisal stated. And he plays this braggadocious. He kind of characterizes him. He has been known for that. Whatever his intent is, it's irresponsible. And what has been demonstrated is completely counter to the facts on the ground and undermines the whole effort to ensure cessation of hostile activities. That requires the withdrawal of forces that would enable any flare-up of conflict. So he is supposed to be very. When he moved from the army into diplomacy, the one requirement for someone going into diplomacy sector is some restraint in language, some restraint in the kind of information that he shared. He doesn't seem to share any of those. It's revealing he's no different what he was during the war. It's very sad. From the African Union, I didn't expect much given AU's position over the last 3 years. But particularly for this verification unit, with its mandate and responsibility, is more focused on some of the show and tell rather than on some of the challenges, recognizing some of the challenges. I wouldn't expect them to say much about their lack of efforts they have done, particularly in Western Tigray, but at least recognizing the challenges and responsibilities they have to delegate the tasks they have been, the responsibilities they have been tasked. So that I didn't have much faith to begin with on the African Union mission for this, but they can claim the position and the responsibility and deliver, but so far on the niceties. Because in my perspective, in my opinion, the very reason, the most important reason this peace is holding is the restraint from Tigray, the restraint from TDF, the cooperation to implement this in its most comprehensive way. They are working in eggshells because Tigray is carrying the burden. Of course, the Abiy regime, for a number of reasons, is also interested in making this peace work to a certain degree, but it's also using a playing card. But the AU needs to push on those. Now they have the mandate, now they have the mission, they have the authority to ensure the monitoring and verification, and supported by AU, supported by the international community. They can and should push the hostile forces that would trigger any conflict in Western Tigray and in Eritrea. Alamata. I mean, isn't it ironic that the president of the state, his hometown, is under the occupation of Amhara forces, and the AU mission wouldn't even make it their first priority? That's a sad fact. That's a tragedy. On the question from our commentator or listener about the Amhara National Forces forming an armed unit, an armed wing to fight Abiy, is an inevitable development of the current political crisis, the ongoing political crisis. This is not the first time. They have done it before. They have done it Arbenyoch, they have done it Kaffain, they have done it Kumbetsaman, different iterations. They have done that. a group of different armed units have formed to resist. What we just saw, and Faisal also elaborated on the response to the question whether the main feature of this country, ethnic federalism, should hold or not. 90%, 90% and 85 or something percent, 90% of Oromia, and close to 90%, if I'm correct, of Somali wanted to ensure, is that 64% or 66% for Somalia? And the Amhara, 20%. Can you see the divergence of interest? How the country should be constituted? I don't know how the respondents were identified, whether this was random sampling, whether this was included all the constituents but not certain demography, whether this was conducted in, I'm not sure, in all languages. But the vision which established the FDRA, the political entities representing a significant portion of the country during the 1993 through that consultation, is now contested, that the vision of the elite Amharas and the vision of the Oromia are completely diametrically opposite. This is a serious challenge. So what Abiy is facing, his regime is facing, are two serious problems. One, a diversion of vision and direction, which needs a political resolution. Even within the same entity, there are going to be different vying political interests, but this is completely different direction. And then to hold peace and security in the country, even tenaciously in its modern sense. Unfortunately, he overplays his cards. And one of the things that we mentioned here is messing up with these issues. From the Amhara group, Amhara nationalists and ultra-nationalists, because of the war over 3 years and continued armament, it's estimated there are close between 300,000 to 500,000 armed personnel in Amhara. Even if they were to succeed, a fraction of this segment, let's say 10%, we are talking about anywhere between 30,000 to 50,000, who can create a serious problem for the security and stability of not just Amhara, but the entire neighboring states, including Tigray, Oromia, Afar, and Addis Ababa. The fallout recently with the Amhara elites, particularly with the ultra-nationalists, may not mean much to his hold on power in the immediate term. But this is gonna, I think, get only worse.
Thank you, Sol, for that. On the Bata factor, if I may, I had a chance to sit with General Taddasa Orada this week for an interview, and I asked him what his take on that. He was not aware what Bata said, but he said if the same thing was said by Burhanu Jula, he would have been worried. So his take on that, even if he didn't have the information, was to say that this is inaccurate and irresponsible, like both of you said. So on Faisal, back to you on the fracture from the survey, like Solomon alluded to as well. We heard today the Holy Synod of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is doing, its second of the two annual assemblies, general assemblies. There is a deep fracture as well on the same line, almost on Oromia and Amhara and so on. So they had to discontinue the general assembly on Friday, and they will resume fully tomorrow. So there is this deepening in terms of church, state, everything else, everything in between. So what do you say about the national dialogue activating the National Dialogue Commission, also activating in terms of resuming public forums and so on? So, Faisal.
Yeah, I think Tadesse Warere, just for the record, General Tadesse Warere's take on Dabala was very correct. If you go back and listen to his statement, Dabala, he said, as far as I know, as far as I am aware of. So he was not even sure of his facts. And he stipulated and he said, if there are things like this, they would be agendized to be talked, meaning at the AU level or whatever. So it looks like he was just pontificating, he wasn't sure. Yes, I think, I feel like Getachew, the dialogue is coming at a time when Abiy and the PP leadership wants to show the Western world some good faith that they are doing something about that. As you recall, the special envoy to the Horn of Africa, Mike Hammer, toured several cities, including Los Angeles, and we had the opportunity to meet with him. And his big message was about the dialogue. Are Ethiopians ready to sit down and talk around the framework of dialogue? And most people said yes, but they questioned the process and the infrastructure about the dialogue. I think from what we understand and from the details that we are learning, that they will pick 450 from each district of the 1,300 plus districts that Ethiopia consists of, and then they will go to the zonal level, and then they will bring some people up to represent each region at the convention. Given what we have seen with the Ethiopian recent election, with the demolition of the Somali party, which really replaced in one day with the PP, it didn't take much to either elect the people that PP wanted by the tune of out of, I think it was like 99.999. There were like 2 or 3 people who run as an independent, and last minute they withdrew their names. So basically, with Madaxa's knowledge, with the knowledge of PP in Addis Ababa, they structured the election in such a way that what the net result, was something that the government in Addis Ababa already projected. I think with this dialogue, it is already corrupted from the process point of view, in the sense that most of the people that have represented different national groups and regions are quantities that don't reflect the interests of the people. I know the Somali person, Mahmoud Jarir, my friend. We went to school together. We were in Somalia together. We were part of the WSLF, Western Somali Liberation Front Youth. He has been with EPRDF for the last 27 years. Not only that, but a vocal spokesperson for the EPRDF system of governance, had no relationship for a long time with the regional government. So one day people just saw him representing the Somali viewpoint. So I think I would assume most regions are like that, if you just extrapolate from the Somali region. So, I think the system is corrupted, and still that infrastructure of that command centralism is still there with the PP. They probably would project the result that they wanted. They will not address the transitional justice that we care about. And basically, even we see already in Tigray and the Tigray administration, how things are getting muted. So yes, it may go on now. They may even be used as a ground to justify the changes that Abiy wants in the constitution. And, it's a good thing to say we are having a international dialogue. It's another thing that it is one that's corrupted by a heavy-handed government that doesn't really involve the public in general. I think if they wanted to do a very inclusive, equitable justice-oriented dialogue, they could have designed it in such a way, but they haven't. So, one is the process is corrupted, the result may not mean much to most of the people, and we will see.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. So on the back to the topic of the monitoring and verification compliance mission briefing in Magala, we didn't hear what the Ethiopian general said, but there was a mention of he was also one of the speakers. But on what Getachew, the president, said, he specifically mentioned, almost apologizing for the Kenyan general, that what the Eritrean forces are doing, not only to the civilians, to everyone where in the areas they are occupied, but to the African monitors as well, as Faisal mentioned. So what is your take on what we hear on the media in terms of briefing and reporting, and what is really on the ground is not what you see is what you get?
I concur. So Getachew more or less conveyed some of the issues with a lot of restraint. I think he could have done much better if he was prepared more. You don't need to use inflammatory or inciting language to convey your message, but still be able to convey the serious challenges. The Amhara administration in Abiy has pressure from Amhara ultra-nationalists to keep the pressure, political demands from Amhara ultra-nationalists. But then the Amhara government and the armed forces continue to settle every day with the blessing of the Amhara regional administration by facilitating logistics, transportation, moving significant population from those displaced from the Sudan, those displaced from Walega and from other parts of Gojam and Fanus, unemployed, and resettle them in Tigray. This is a spoiler. This goes contrary to the spirit and articles of the understanding and the memorandums they signed, the declarations they signed in Nairobi. He should mention that he also, meaning the International Regional Administration, has a responsibility and a demand from its constituents that there are 2.4 million people demanding every single day and pushing pressure on him to take their own measures. There is a TDF that is constituted that comes from these families demanding that their families be returned to their home. So he should be able to elaborate that. He can use all sorts of conveying his messages that he has that responsibility and that the monitoring and verification and the international community, they know, but it should be kept mentioning again and again. On Eritrean forces, I think he did. He could still say much more, not just only on Zalambesa and Europe, particularly the Europe community. It's not the mere presence of Eritrean forces, but the activities of the Eritrean forces within Europe, within Glomakhda, within Zalambesa, within Gala, and then much worse in Adiabo and Humara, all that. I think he can detail those issues. He shouldn't be expecting the monitoring and verification unit to speak for him. So that's, I think, where he failed to deliver and impress upon the verification and the international community. He alluded that he has these conversations with the director privately, but this is not a private matter. This is obvious and everybody knows. It's the elephant in the room, and it should be stated. So that's one of the challenges that I see, because there is demand from the community every day, which undermine, which will eventually and may very potentially derail the entire process. But potential is now undermining the legitimacy of the international regional arbitration. If it cannot deliver these things, the constituent is going to revolt on that. So I think that's an area people are counting on as something to for granted, while babysitting the Amhara forces in the Amhara regional administration.
Yeah, as we speak, Getachew Reda has been very busy the past days and maybe even today with community representatives from different corners of Tigray, mostly IDPs. We know 71 schools in Tigray. They are sheltering IDPs, and the hope and the promise has been that they will be um, returning to their homesteads before the rainy season starts, but we are not seeing that. Faisal, we want to go to the last segment of our show, and we are limited our viewers by the satellite slot we have. It's a 1 hour max slot. Faisal, what's your take in terms of your final thoughts for the day?
I think Getachew spoke in a very measured way at that meeting with the monitoring group because he didn't want to spill the beans all over. But I think the blessing in disguise in this Tigray peace deal with the PP government is that all the international major powers, Antony Blinken, the EU, EAU, all of them affirmed the need for this to work. So that's, the blessing. I think I totally agree with Solomon. The people of Tigray expect Getachew Reda and his government to be a bit more assertive, not aggressive, but assertive. I think there is a sense that we are feeling that, because of what happened, Tigray is holding back more than necessary. But I think we should understand the fact that the world is watching, the world is with this program, the world has shown to Ethiopian government that they cannot just walk over everybody the way they want. This is an international agreement, as we have seen last week, how the Tigray TPLF is demanded to reinstate was denied illegally. And I have done a lot of I had one lawyer, if I just add that, one centrist lawyer that they called, who was just saying that when the Parliament of Ethiopia removed the tag of terrorism from Tigray, they should have also added the law to say, no, at the highest level of a lawmaking parliament, they issue the general rule and the general decree and the general resolution. One is the issue that each and every entity and institution, as the peace accord in Pretoria mentions, should go tear off from that legislation that the parliament passed and correct any misgivings or any deficiency that came as a result of the previous action. The Ethiopian parliament cannot address properties that TPLF has, communications, membership, Ministry of Water, Ministry of this and that. No, each entity and each institution should hear to what the parliament passed and then look at their papers and the program and then correct. I think Magdaksa erred on this issue, and the Tigray government and the TPLF needs to assert itself on issues like this, knowing that the peace deal is a legal mandate that's between the Ethiopian government, as they did and mentioned, and TPLF. And with that, I think I expect Getachew Reda as the president, interim president, and his team to be more assertive than what they have been so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Sol, what's your final thought?
I completely second that, and I would add the Abiy government has the responsibility now on its end to enforce through the entire cabinet structure, but also regional administrations, including Afar and Amhara. They are accountable to him. So he should be using that, the deal should be holding, and he's responsible for that part. But one very pressing thing that the international community needs to deliver, particularly USAID and World Food Program, they have withhold food aid distributions for a number of reasons, but particularly there has been mismanagements and leakage, substantive leakage and misuse of humanitarian assistance. But they have to find alternatives because the humanitarian need cannot wait, simply cannot wait. So yes, you have to be make sure the mechanisms work and work efficiently, but at the same time, until you find to fill the gaps and address some of the holes, there are mechanisms that are working, already working. They should intensify those. And the rainy season is here. It's already here. They have to intensify the seed supply, the fertilizer supply, which they haven't. Fertilizer still is way, way behind. So I hope the international community will pick up. And then the pressure, the international, not only the Abiy administration, but the international community, by the way, has a leverage too. If they want peace to hold in Western Tigray, there are simple steps they can do. They can withhold their investment and any formal relationships with the Amhara government. They can use that too. Simple. They have many development packages outside humanitarian assistance they can leverage. They can stop visiting Amhara state. They can withhold development and investment to enforce that. This is not about interfering in domestic politics. This is the agreement that any hostile forces should leave Tigray, other than ANDF and TDF forces.
Thank you, gentlemen. With that, we end today's show. Today, we spoke about monitoring the monitors, African Union Monitoring, Verification, and Compliance Mission on Ethiopia-Tigray peace, based on the briefing that was given by the mission in Maqala this week. And we also covered what the Dialogue Commission, the National Dialogue Commission, is starting. We covered, among other things as well, the survey done by the Ethiopia Policy Studies Institute. The study was completed in October 2022, just before the Pretoria Agreement was, but was released only this week. And that clearly shows the disparity in the country in terms of what the constitution is about, how it should be amended if it's going to happen. Thank you, Faisal and Solomon, for your time today, and see you next week.
Thank you.
The H panel finishes here. As you know, we are broadcasting in a number of languages: Tigrinya, Amharic, and English. The H panel is the weekly English show. And we have had an interview in Tigrinya with high-profile people like the president of interim regional administration of Tigray, Getachew Reda, his two vice presidents, General Tzadkan and General Taddese Warada. We'll continue to have these kind of conversations in Amharic, in English, and in other languages as much as possible as well, because UMD Media is a multilingual platform that is trying to work and contribute for an evidence-led, evidence-rich discourse and decision-making in the Horn of Africa. And it's also working on the three pillars: understanding, measuring, and doing. These are the three pillars of UMD Media, hence its name, UMD. And your host was Getachew Safa. Before you sign off, please share, like, subscribe. And we also are on satellite under HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services, at Yasat. That is a satellite we are broadcasting to the Horn of Africa region. Good night from here. Bye.